Hello everyone, and welcome to game number 2 in this best of 3 between SorenJohnson and Cubit32. We're in the semi-final round of the second Offworld tournament, and as you can see, we are still playing on Beta 3, same as game 1, still on Reveal Map, same as game 1. Cubit taking game 1 fairly easily, just kind of ignoring everything Soren was doing, buying up just enough of his own stock to stay alive and outlast his opponent while he pushes to those Offworlds. And while he pushes to HQ level 5, Soren stuck on HQ level 4 after his initial run at Cubit, couldn't quite finish it out, and so the long-term play for Cubit, allowing him to come out on top in that initial game. This looks like another rather frustrating map for our players. The last one was not particularly kind, and this one has not changed its tune at all. Just spotty bits of iron everywhere, very small amounts of carbon available, really going to restrict their choices on how they're able to play out this game and what colonies they'll be able to utilize. Just a lot of silicon and a lot of water scattered about. Soren's going to go ahead and take a found for about 35,000 in debt. Cubit's going to take a found for nothing. Fairly confident that, well, maybe it's just that when all spots are equally bad, it doesn't matter which bad one you get at the end of the day. So Cubit's going to take that slightly later found. He's going to get that extra claim on HQ level 2, and he's going to start the game with a significantly higher stock price, going into some iron and aluminum for himself, whereas Soren has moved into just a pair of steel mills and likely an aluminum mine. There it is for himself. 1.5 aluminum a second for Soren, 2 a second for Cubit, a lot of iron per second for Cubit as well, but Soren already in those steel mills, should be fairly straightforward for him to go ahead and push to HQ level 2. He's just going to be waiting on an aluminum shipment to make that happen before too long, it looks like. Cubit, on the other hand, he's going to need to buy up a significant amount of steel still. He needs 12 more steel to really finish off the game. He's going to have the iron and the aluminum available to do it, and he's likely hoping that Soren kind of sells down some steel, as he did, in order to just drop that price a little bit before he goes for that upgrade. He may just even wait for the aluminum to come in and the iron to come in, sell that down, and then just hit the upgrade button without worrying about micromanaging the situation. Third steel mill coming down for Soren. No big surprise. That's all just fine indeed. And we do have a geotherm oxygen. Well, this is a bit easier for Cubit to use. Cheaper geotherm available. It's much closer to his base in case it gets blown up. Things of that nature, but still available to Soren as well. Not the worst thing in the world. It is an extra claim. It just happens to be an extra claim that you had to use for 2 power. But it gives you another claim to kind of commit elsewhere later on. Still a good tile to have. Wouldn't be too surprised if this does go to Cubit for 20,000. That's a pretty reasonable price. I imagine he'll get that geotherm down sometime on HQ level 2 or 3. Not going to rush to it immediately. He needs that steel gathered up, and he's going to want to make sure he secures steel production before he really makes that move. We can see Cubit being patient. He's got the 80 steel, he's got the aluminum stored up, but he does not have the iron yet. It only just now came in where he can really throw down steel mills immediately, so he waits for the iron, then he hits the upgrade button, being very careful not to take on any extra debt that he did not absolutely have to. Good moves out of Cubit. Soren has decided to commit his last 2 claims over into reactors. Very reasonable. Easy move to make. Reactors should be making him significant amounts of money. About 34 to 35 a piece. There we go. Bumping up to 50 with that adjacency bonus. But one has to be a bit concerned. Looks like not as much fuel being consumed this time by these players. And so will these reactors hold out for all that long? I guess we'll just have to find out. Very aggressive early power surge by Soren onto Cubit. Cubit was really hoping to be able to produce steel quickly and maybe get the benefit from a large amount of steel production, but instead Soren's going to lock him out of it, take that for himself. Cubit is making sure, in response to this, to simply buy up iron's price in order to make it a little bit more difficult for Soren's one building that's having to consume iron to actually make a profit. But of course we see the food shortage come in, and Cubit's instead going to commit into that. Cubit may be coming out a bit on top with that shortage. Yeah, it looks like Soren didn't bother with it at all, quite likely. And so Cubit coming out on top in the short term with that, as he had not committed to a black market purchase this early. Excuse me, he had a bit more money to throw around. Soren, interestingly enough, has decided to move into farms instead of reactors in response to this. He's also gone ahead and purchased up a new claim to allow him a nice little farm triangle. Strong move out of Soren to make sure he gets the long-term benefit out of this shortage. Moving away from those reactors, just being willing to say, okay, time to scrap out of it. Random event occurred. I need to go ahead and respond. Does that just fine. Both players sitting on the 40 glass they're going to require for an upgrade at this point, by the way. And we'll have to see. Soren did make that claim purchase, so it would be very aggressive of him to acquire any more black market in the short term. Maybe wants to store up a bit of his cash to make sure he can transition through headquarters a bit better this game and into better production this game. Thinking machines coming down already. This is going to be worth a lot of cash. This is a real good time to go ahead and check Offworld prices. We can see prices up above 500. Not as good as the last game, but still solid for this particular run. So thinking machines on and Offworld will be quite useful. If engineering labs are selected or patent labs, thinking machines will go ahead and protect them from black market very effectively. And Cubit's going to go ahead and take that one for 20,000 debt. No big surprise, as Cubit started with significantly less debt. So he just kind of gets a couple of auctions fairly early on. And now the players' debt levels have evened out to about the same at 65, 66,000-ish at this stage of the game. So nice advantages for Cubit from founding later. Really, I mean, if we look at it that way, he's gotten an extra claim off of it for when he hit HQ level 2. He got an extra claim from this auction that he used to grab up a geotherm, and he's gotten thinking machines. All kind of rewards for just being willing to found a little bit later, and maybe getting a set of tiles that he wasn't exactly, maybe weren't the exact ideal if Soren happened to take his initial spot that he wanted. Cubit has managed to get to HQ level 3 at this point, moving into some farms of his own. No big surprise after the food shortage. Farms should be making a significant amount of money, but the farms are not going to be as good as Soren's, and Soren has already managed to push to HQ level 4. He's going to finally get down some power production of his own. Hasn't let his debt get too out of control this game, but it would be very, very soon if these solar panels weren't coming down. Also should be noted that Silicon's price has been driven up fairly substantially at this stage of the game, already up at $50, and so these solar panels may be a bit more difficult to move into than Soren would like, costing at this point about $6,000 of resources. Not really what you want, but definitely a move you have to make in order to avoid just death spiraling on out of the game. Cubit once again showing that he can make the better short-term use of these shortages. He's the one who reacts to them the fastest. He goes ahead and makes those buys and commits completely into them, whereas Soren has been mostly ignoring these in the short term, but then going ahead and responding to them long term, getting some carbon production down immediately. Of course, that price was a bit of a fake. The actual carbon price is only $60, not the $100 that Soren thought it might have been during that shortage, as Cubit had dragged that price up fairly heavily, and then sold out of it, and catching up to HQ level 4 very quickly. Also, a double mutiny down onto Soren's solar panels with power up $148. Nighttime on the way, so maybe not the best timed out of Cubit, just perhaps the best he could accomplish. He would have wanted to commit into that a bit earlier if he could have, but that wasn't necessarily an option, so still a reasonable play, taking away a substantial amount of Soren's power. The 4 power drops too low. I imagine he'll try and move into some power of his own, some more, before long, so maybe Soren continues to not take a huge advantage, but we'll just have to see exactly what Cubit decides to commit to once nighttime is over. Another claim auction coming out for some water. This would be very nice for Cubit in a lot of ways. Maybe a bit nicer for Cubit than it is for Soren. But Soren, kind of tired of letting auctions go this game. He's pushing this one fairly high, up to 24,000. I wouldn't be surprised if Cubit just lets that go at this point and says, all right, try and use the tile, man. Because that is a long ways away to be bringing water back home. Water fairly valuable right now, but still, very long time before Soren can get any kind of benefit off that tile. It is going to be a water pump flying out that direction. And we'll just have to see exactly how that pans out. Also worth noting, by the way, that Soren continuing to consume silicon and build buildings that require more silicon, while Cubit, he's not even sitting on a silicon stockpile. That price is just $100 right now. And Cubit's the one pulling in 4.5 silicon a second. That is a lot of money in Cubit's pocket off just these 2 tiles. They should be 2 of the most valuable tiles on this map. And Soren's just letting him have it through his plays with solar panels and this glass furnace that's continuing to consume silicon. Interestingly enough, still barely making a profit at this moment, but not as good as one that would be on top of silicon for sure. Cubit can hit HQ level 5 if he wishes. It's kind of a Cubit style, it seems, is to just keep moving through upgrades the best that he can. We'll have to see if he goes for that immediately or if he's going to kind of wait it out, see if he's waiting on additional resources. He does push for it very, very quickly and goes ahead and gets himself into some power production as well. No real big surprise. He definitely wanted that. We can also see Cubit's thrown down a little bit of... Interestingly enough, he has thrown down solar panels on top of the water down here. I don't believe he already had those tiles. Maybe a bit of a response to the fact that Soren took this high tile. He allowed Soren to pay a lot of debt for it, but then guaranteed that Soren would not have good access to adjacency bonuses without committing into something like slant drilling, and at the same time, getting a lot of power production up for himself. Much better for him to be spending a lot on these solar panels immediately, making sure they're online for the high power price, and then just selling down the silicon a little bit later. It's okay for him that silicon's price has remained high the entire time, because he's not interested in making glass, and he's the one pulling in silicon. His opponent is not, for the time being. And so it was a little bit better for him to make sure silicon stayed expensive in the short term. We can see he's even forced his opponent out of his glass furnaces and into silicon quarries, and in response to that happening, made a power surge onto his opponent to shut it down and ensure that he would still get the benefit out of all of it. Chem Labs are down for Soren. Once again, Chem Labs very valuable this patch. We can see they're making about $120 on the ones on top of carbon, and about 80 to 90 on the one that's not. Need to make sure that's auto-supplied. There it goes. Carbon and fuel flying on out to it. That's very good for Soren indeed. Both players have hit HQ level 5 at this point, it should be noted. And Soren has already grabbed up carbon scrubbing for himself. Just got it a moment ago, I believe. There it is. We'll have to see what he moves into next with the patent lab and see what other great plays he can make. But Cubit, once again, heading to that Offworld. He knows he has thinking machines available, and he wants to see if he can make some use out of it. Going ahead and goon squatting it for the moment, but late game, if that goon squad gets to 30,000, 50,000, and Cubit can't afford to buy it anymore, he'll still be in a good spot. Auction won by Soren again, way off in the corner of the map. Cubit just kind of driving that up and then letting it go for the mere price of 18,000. We'll have to see if that pays itself off for Soren. Water is still staying very valuable, as Soren's been shutting down Cubit's water periodically. But Cubit, still with access to far better water production, we can see these tiles all together, pulling in about 9 water a second, and he's not been consuming all that much. These reactors will change that, but still, he should have a surplus of about 1.5 water after all these reactors turn online. There it is. Whereas Soren is operating on, right now, a surplus also of 1.5 water. The advantage of being scientific, you can pull water right out of the ground. But his water just costs so much more money to get home. Look at this. Look how much fuel is being burnt just to bring water home for Soren. That's what I'm really concerned about here. Also, interestingly enough, Cubit continuing to run these steel mills non-stop for the moment. It looks like he is just trying to gather up as much steel as he can, but in order to make these off-worlds cheap. But I'm kind of concerned about this, because he could just be gathering the iron, sell that down, and purchase the steel far more easily. No real reason to keep these steel mills running like this and just burning this much money a second, to my mind at least. Maybe Cubit can correct us about that later. But I am a bit concerned. It does seem like he's wasting a significant amount of money in these steel mills. Maybe he just hasn't noticed. I'm not entirely sure, but it's almost certainly not a good play out of Cubit. The first Offworld launch comes through. Soren, it should be noted, has not committed into the stock market the way he did last game. And so he's had a bit more money to play around with. He's got that patent lab running still. It is researching him teleportation once again, trying to get through these expensive fuel prices. But he still doesn't have an Offworld established when his opponent is already in one. He's gone for this patent lab to try and take some kind of advantage off of it. But he doesn't have anything in the stock market, and on top of that, his stock price is significantly lower than his opponent's, as he has 60,000 more debt and has made no stock purchases yet. So I'm still very concerned about Soren at this stage. He's in those lucrative chems, but those are falling off rapidly due to the high amount of fuel being consumed at the moment until he goes ahead and grabs up teleportation. And I don't really see Soren's edge right now. If he could get into some electronics production, that would probably be a very good move for him, considering that he has carbon scrubbing established. He can ignore the high carbon price and make these very, very nice electronics at the cost of only 0.25 aluminum and 0.25 silicon a second. Even if he placed them instead of his glass furnaces, might also have been a strong play. But instead, we're going to see reactors come out. Auction goes over to Soren for 7,000. That was real cheap for pirates. But nothing really all that great to steal. Looks like Silicon is going to be the best bet. That should be well worth it, but still though, interesting to let pirates go so cheap. I will say that was very nice for Soren at the end of the day. Silicon expensive enough to have been worth it. Soren has also moved into an Offworld at this point. It'll be completed before long. It is protected by a goon squad. No thinking machines for Soren, but he is still a scientific player, which makes things a bit easier for him. Finally, we see the electronics factories come down. Those should be a decent sum of money for Soren, but unfortunately for him, his opponent made it there first, and likely will get the better benefit. Cubit with 2 Offworlds down, almost. He's really making a move here. He's almost managed to purchase up Soren just on the back of these Offworld launches that have been non-stop since that initial Offworld was constructed. Secured 7 of Soren's stock by now. Soren really needs to grab up that last little bit any way he can. He does potentially have the resources to do it, but he's too late to make it happen. So Cubit already halfway to purchasing Soren. This game might be over very soon with just some quick Offworld launches, allowing him to leap up to that red button. Soren maybe just a bit too slow in making his investments pay off for him. The patent lab, still very difficult to make good use of. Don't know if it's actually made him enough money to have been worth the tile investment and the chemical cost. Cubit, unsurprisingly, goes ahead and takes game number 2 with an excessive number of Offworlds, an excessive amount of steel, still managing to make the strong investment. Getting to HQ level 5 as an expansive player, getting to those very cheap, expansive Offworlds, and making those work for him once again. Strong plays out of Cubit in game number 2, for sure. Alright guys, let's take a look at what happened that game. Cubit, I think, was generally just more successful at navigating this map, at basically understanding what was a good investment and what was a bad investment. It kind of felt like Soren almost went into the patent lab and teleportation to cover the cost of the auctions that he took in those later stages of the game. So it was a very strange thing. It's like kind of forcing him into a corner where, all right, well, you can have these, but they're not all that good. And then if you want to be able to use them at all, you kind of have to take teleportation. And that's a pretty big commitment of time and money, and it's just maybe not all coming together, not necessarily the right way to think about things if that was the thought process for teleportation. This idea of, well, I guess I took those tiles, I want to be able to use them. It's just a massive commitment for 2 water pumps with no adjacency bonuses, not really what you want to see in the later stages of the game. And I think that was a bit of a stumbling point for Soren, allowing his stock to get purchased a bit more easily. Not exactly what you want to see. Still though, reasonably well played game. Soren got off to an early lead, but what it really feels like, and what this tournament's been showing us, is that Cubit, he'll let his opponent kind of get off to an early lead, but not worry about it too much. He'll just kind of sit there, make sure that he's got the resources to keep upgrading, and then say, I'm just going to out-transition you in the late, and it'll be just fine. Yes, wanted carbon scrubbing from the patent lab, says Soren, but also pushing to teleportation later. Felt like game would go on longer, I guess. Yeah. Maybe a bit surprised by the effectiveness of Cubit's Offworlds, but people still really getting a feel for the Beta 3 1v1 and exactly how long those games go. So not too surprising that people would be a little bit unsure about exactly what the game length is going to be at this stage. Let's go ahead and check Black Market again. Cubit, only 6 Black Market purchases this game. No new claims this time. Very, very different strategy from last time. Maybe he didn't feel like he needed any extra tiles, and he just wanted to make sure he established his Offworlds as fast as he possibly could, purchasing up 1 Power Surge, 1 EMP, a couple of Mutinies, and a couple of Goon Squads that game. Getting hit by a couple Power Surges, a Dynamite, and an EMP. Overall, should be a fairly even game for Black Market between these players, but we can see Soren purchasing a large number of new claims, unlike Cubit. Which is interesting, given that he had also won all these auctions. You have to wonder how much that paid out, and it would depend exactly on when those claim purchases were made. But was it worth it to go ahead and grab up those extra claims? I want to say yes, the game went on long enough. But it's kind of odd having access to all those extra new claims. It should have put him about on par with Cubit's number of tiles. And yet still just getting outproduced and beaten to that Offworld quite easily by Cubit. Kind of that expansive edge still, the Offworld costing 200 less steel. These 2 Offworlds together cost the same amount of steel as this lone Offworld, so good use of Cubit by his chosen colony. going ahead and rushing to that Offworld as fast as possible. Patents for Cubit. He got thinking machines, extremely valuable. Makes himself almost unassailable for his special buildings, whereas Soren, he got teleportation and carbon scrubbing. Don't know if either of those really panned out this game. Nice ideas, but as a scientific player, if you're thinking about teleportation anyway, do you really want carbon scrubbing, or do you want slant drilling? You're fairly resistant to black market, so your tiles can be grouped up fairly effectively, and one simple goon squad can block off most of an EMP, especially as a scientific player. And so with slant drilling next to carbon tiles, you basically have carbon scrubbing anyways, and there wasn't any really benefit being made out of carbon scrubbing. The electronics factories, they did get some of it, but why wouldn't they have been put over on top of the silicon instead of the glass, for example, so that you could use silicon and carbon from carbon scrubbing and only having to be purchasing aluminum? If you're going to just be using carbon scrubbing, why not have gotten slant drilling and made sure that you had kind of thought out your tiles earlier, set them up over next to the carbon for that late game production? Just a bit of maybe some small missteps in use of the patent lab that didn't pan out late into the game, whereas Cubit's simple investment into an Offworld, not particularly complicated, not a lot can go wrong with it, and you just make a huge chunk of money if you can manage to get there. Okay guys, that's going to wrap up the best of 3. 2-0 over to Cubit32. And so he is going to be facing PB Head in our final round. Don't know exactly when that's going to be happening. I'm sure the announcement will be made the moment these two players actually decide on a time. But once again, I believe that's a rematch of last tournament's finals. Cubit32 and PB Head likely will be played on Beta 3 once again. And so we're just going to have to find out exactly who can take the title this time.